The first time someone called my child a mistake, it was at a family dinner. The room went silent after the words were spoken. My cousin had been talking about life choices, shaking his head dramatically as he looked around the table. Then he glanced at my child sitting beside me and laughed quietly. "Well," he said, "some people just make mistakes, and then have to live with them." No one laughed. But no one corrected him either. My child kept looking down at their plate, pretending they didn't understand what he meant. But children understand more than adults think. I felt my chest tighten with anger, but I forced a calm smile. Family gatherings had always been like this since the day my child was born. Whispers. Judgment. Side comments. To them, my child wasn't part of the plan. They called the pregnancy unexpected. They called the situation complicated. But when my grandfather first held my child as a baby, he smiled in a way I had never seen before. "This one," he said softly, "is special." At the time, nobody paid attention. But years later, his words would change everything. My child grew up hearing small comments that slowly shaped the atmosphere around them. Relatives would say things like, "You must have had a difficult start. Life didn't go the way it was supposed to." They never said the word mistake directly in front of my child again. But the meaning was always there. Despite all that, my child loved visiting my grandfather. His house felt different. Calmer. Warmer. While the rest of the family talked about money, property, and business, my child sat beside him in the garden asking simple questions about life. Why do trees grow so slowly? Why do people argue about money so much? My grandfather always laughed gently. Because people forget what really matters. Sometimes I noticed other relatives watching them from a distance. Not smiling. Just watching. Like they were worried about something. Back then, I didn't fully understand why. But the answer would become clear years later. My grandfather owned almost everything the family cared about. The old house. Several properties. And a business that had supported the entire family for decades. Everyone assumed the inheritance would be divided between his children and their families. It had always been that way. But there was one thing people didn't expect. The bond between my grandfather and my child. Every weekend, my child visited him. They helped him water plants in the garden. They listened to his long stories about the past. They asked questions no adult ever asked anymore. My grandfather once told me quietly, "You know why I like spending time with your child?" "Why?" I asked. "Because they talk to me like I'm a person, not like I'm a bank account." That sentence stayed in my mind. But I didn't realize how important it would become. As the years passed, my grandfather's health slowly started to decline. He walked slower. His hands trembled slightly when he held his tea. But whenever my child visited, something changed. His energy returned. He smiled more. He laughed more. One afternoon I walked into the garden and saw them sitting together on the bench. My child was showing him a drawing they had made. My grandfather looked at it carefully like it was the most important artwork in the world. "This is beautiful," he said. Across the yard, my uncle watched them with a serious expression. Later that day I overheard him whispering to another relative, "He's getting too attached to that kid." The other person replied quietly, "If he changes the will, we're all in trouble." That was the first time I realized something bigger might be happening. Months later my grandfather called me unexpectedly. "Can you come by tomorrow?" he asked. His voice sounded serious. When I arrived, I noticed someone else sitting in the living room. A lawyer. My heart skipped a beat. My grandfather smiled calmly. "Don't worry," he said. "I just want to make sure everything is clear." The lawyer placed several documents on the table. Official documents. Important ones. My grandfather leaned forward and said quietly, "I've spent my whole life building something for this family. But I've also spent my life watching how people behave." He looked directly at me. "And sometimes the people who deserve the most are the ones everyone ignores." Then he signed the final page. I didn't know exactly what the document said. But I knew something important had just happened. Life continued normally after that meeting. Or at least it seemed normal. Family gatherings still happened. Relatives still whispered. My child still heard the same comments. But my grandfather's behavior never changed. If anything, he became even more protective. One day during dinner, someone joked again about my child being an unexpected situation. My grandfather placed his fork down slowly. Then he said something no one expected. Some of the best things in life are unexpected. The table went silent. No one argued with him. But I could see the tension growing in the room. A year later, my grandfather passed away peacefully. The entire family gathered for the funeral. People cried. They shared stories. But underneath the sadness, there was another emotion. Curiosity. Everyone knew what would happen soon. The will would be read. And that meant the future of the family inheritance would finally be decided. Some relatives were already confident. The house will go to Dad. The business will be split between the brothers. No one mentioned my child. To them, my child still didn't belong in that conversation. But I remembered the meeting with the lawyer. And I remembered my grandfather signing those papers. A week later, the whole family gathered at the lawyer's office. The room was crowded. Everyone sat quietly waiting for the reading to begin. The lawyer opened a thick folder. These are the final wishes of your grandfather. He started reading smaller items first. Jewelry. Personal belongings. Family heirlooms. Relatives nodded politely. But everyone was waiting for the big announcement. The property. The business. The inheritance. Then the lawyer reached the final section. And suddenly the entire room became very quiet. The lawyer cleared his throat. The remainder of the estate will be placed in a trust. Several relatives frowned. Then he continued reading. The primary beneficiary of this trust will be. He paused. My great-grandchild. For a moment no one understood. Then everyone slowly turned their heads. Toward my child, shock spread across the room. My cousin stood up immediately. This can't be right, he said. But the lawyer calmly pointed to the document. Your grandfather personally approved and signed this section. My uncle looked furious. All of this goes to a child. The lawyer nodded. That was his decision. No one spoke after that. Because suddenly the truth was undeniable. The child they called a mistake was the one my grandfather trusted the most. The room filled with whispers. Some relatives looked angry. Others looked embarrassed. My child sat quietly beside me, confused by the reaction. Why are they upset? They asked softly. I squeezed their hand. Because Grandpa believed in you. Across the table, my cousin shook his head in disbelief. But the document was clear. My grandfather had made his decision. And nothing could change it now. Later that evening my child asked another question. Why did Grandpa choose me? I thought carefully before answering. Because you listened to him. You cared about him. You treated him like family. My child looked thoughtful. I just liked spending time with him. Exactly. That was the difference. While others cared about money, my child cared about him. Weeks passed. The family slowly accepted the truth. Not happily. But they accepted it. My grandfather had made his final statement through that document. He had seen something others ignored. Kindness. Honesty. And genuine love. My child eventually understood what had happened. But the inheritance wasn't the important part. The important part was what it represented. Validation. Respect. Proof that they had always mattered. Even when others said they didn't. Years later I still remember that moment in the lawyer's office. The silence. The shock. The realization. For years my child had been called a mistake. But one document proved something very different. My child was never a mistake. They were the one person who truly understood what family meant. Truth.